Hi everyone. So my name is Milena. I'll be Milena Shuytsova. I'll be the moderator today for the panel of the medical devices in the digital health era. So I would like first to thank our speakers for agreeing to take part in the biotech atelier. And there is no doubt that these are some of the most challenging times ever faced by the medical technology industry. The postponement of the implementation of the new regulation and the uncertainties connected with it, the upcoming challenges due to Brexit, and all of these during the times of the pandemic might fill the regulatory professionals with fear and trepidation. But the coin has two sides, and we are actually witnessing the rapid evolvement of the digital healthcare and the opportunity it will give to us. Nowadays, everyone has a fitness or other health-related applications on their smartphones, and this is just the beginning. Of course, this is a mere example of how new technologies can simplify our lives. Terms like virtual reality and artificial intelligence in the healthcare might have sounded as science fiction terms only 10, 15 years ago, but nowadays they're developing pretty fast. Furthermore, most devices now incorporate sensors such as accelerometers, global positioning, satellite components, and cameras, which have greatly improved their functionality, and this has expanded their usability into areas such as healthcare. So consequently, the app developers have been producing software that falls into the medical devices applications and healthcare categories. Some of these applications will be classified as medical devices, others as diagnostic devices, and some will fall outside of the scope of these definitions and be classified as borderline products. So everyone from our speakers today has prepared a different point of view of the future of the medical devices in the digital health era. So we will begin with our first speaker, Ernesto. Nogueira, he is founder and CEO of Valueconnected. So this company is considered by its clients as the #1 company in Europe for demonstrating the value of medical products. Ernesto has 23 years of experience in the life sciences industry and has previously held positions at Johnson & Johnson, GSK, and World Health Organization. Currently, Ernesto is working to harness the power of artificial intelligence and data science to generate actionable insights and identify unmet needs for value-based healthcare and market access projects. He is a frequent speaker in the congresses across Europe, United States, and Latin America, and he's the chairperson of the Global MedTech Reimbursement Roundtable. And with this introduction, Ernesto, I would like to give the floor to you. And
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Milena, for the nice introduction. Also, great afternoon to panelists and everyone attending the Biotech Atelier event. It is a pleasure to be here. I will share my screen. Please let me know if you can see the slide.
yes,
Yeah.
I can see.
Fantastic. So, as Milena mentioned, I am the CEO and founder of Valueconnected, a company that I started in 2013. And I am very excited to have this opportunity today to discuss the applications of artificial intelligence for medical devices. As Milena mentioned, this seemed like science fictions. A few years ago, I remember when we had our first AI project in 2016, it was so innovative, but now the majority of our projects are related to AI, and the implications and the power of AI has grown exponentially to levels that in some aspects even surpasses the the predictions that we had in the science fictions years ago. And this will continue to go on and on. So what I intend to do is for the next 15 minutes to briefly talk about Valueconnected and then go into the main part of our discussion today, which is to share a definition of AI, just to make sure that everybody is on the same page, although I'm pretty sure everybody has a good grasp of what AI means, and then the challenges that have been accelerating the adoption of AI and how AI can help with addressing those problems, those pain points in the healthcare market, especially for medical devices. And also mention how the coronavirus situation, which is a very unfortunate situation, on the other hand, has also accelerated the need for AI, and even share with you an example of a case in Bulgaria, which we know it's a very advanced country in terms of technology. So it's no surprise that is also taking a certain leadership role in AI adoption for healthcare as well. And at the end, I will share some real cases with you, and then some conclusions from my side. So once again, thank you so much for the biotech, and let's get started. So about Valueconnected, it's a company that I founded in 2013, and now we have a team of 36 associates in 31 different countries. And what we believe are basically two things. One, by speaking the local language, having the local contacts, and having a combination of a sales and market access experience helps us to support our clients in implementing their projects in the field. So it's beyond going from strategic advice, but actually implementing, talking to stakeholders in the market. And who are these stakeholders? So we're focusing on clinical and economic decision makers. So those are basically the decision, part of the decision process, not only to evaluate and decide what AI solutions should be implemented, but also other medical technologies as well. And we have 3 offices, so the main office in The Hague, the Netherlands, and then in Berlin, Germany, and São Paulo, Brazil. But what do we do for AI? What are typical questions do we have? So in the sense of looking into AI of healthcare, one of the questions is, what is the value? What is the benefit that we are bringing with a certain solution for AI? And once again, this value should match the perception of a clinical and economic decision makers, because they have different perceptions in terms of what outcomes they need. Then where to implement, which care setting, which country, where should we go first? And then how can we launch it? Who should we get involved to bringing this AI solution to the market? Sometimes you're talking about an AI solution that helps a certain existing process to become faster or more precise, but in other aspects, the AI is implemented in a way that actually revolutionizes or creates a breakthrough into the healthcare system. And this sounds fantastic, this sounds great, but also those highly innovative solutions come with significant resistance. So how can we address those obstacles to make sure that the AI is implemented in the best way possible? And last but not least, who's going to pay for that? Is there any kind of a reimbursement and kind of a system that will make sure that AI is rewarded and the solutions are rewarded in the proper way? And of course, we have the other panelist, Ben Modley, my friend, my colleague, who will discuss more about that specifically in Germany. So that's basically what we do. But if we look into AI, how can we define AI? And most people, of course, take the eye of intelligence and thinking, okay, it's about taking decisions. It is also about taking decisions, but not only that. It is about having the human cognitive factors to recognize and perceive aspects, and then from these aspects, take a decision. So think about, for example, face recognition or the assistance that you have in your mobile device and recognize your voice. All those aspects of recognizing patterns, understanding voice, text, and then incorporating this into problem solvings and decisions, all of that are encapsulated into artificial intelligence. I am not going to go into details about artificial neurons or machine learning and data science, but all of those aspects are incorporated into AI. And basically, it is an umbrella that will help us taking decisions faster, but also understanding the patterns that we have around us. But what is interesting about AI and sometimes frightening is that AI learns very fast. So if I show you this slide, for example, we have here 10 images of people. And if I ask you what is similar among all of these 10 pictures, what are the similarities that you see? Some of you will basically say, well, they all have hair, or most of them are smiling, all of them, something like this. But the similarity among them is that none of these persons exist. They have been all created by algorithm in this website. This person does not exist. But basically, it is a fantastic example of a machine that learn how a person should look like, and then based on all these characteristics and all these variances in hair color, eye color, length of hair, smiling or more serious, is able to create a very realistic face that we immediately recognize as a human being. Of course, there are mistakes, but this is an example of how advanced AI today to create something that we can barely differentiate if it's real or not. So looking into bringing this power to healthcare, why do we need AI in healthcare, artificial intelligence, with all this cognitive power of understanding and taking decisions? So first of all, there is a huge waste of resources in healthcare. Resources not only in terms of monetary, in terms of costs, but also in terms of excessive patient days in the hospital or excessive medications, which means healthcare in general, and this goes through all countries. Of course, some countries are wasting more than others, but this is one of the biggest problems that we have. And how can we solve that with such a increasing demand for healthcare? Another big challenge is to ensure we are providing the best patient outcomes. And I know this sounds very obvious, but as I had a professor at university, obvious things must be repeated twice. So we have to put the patient in the center of our focus for healthcare, because that will also generate the biggest return for everyone involved. But how can we make sure that whatever we are doing will have a direct or at least an indirect impact to improve patient outcomes, and not making sure that we are doing activities just because it is part of the process, or that we needed to make sure they are completed, because sometimes these activities are not directly improving patient outcome. Big data. A very important metaphor that I wanted to leave here is that data in healthcare is not like an ocean, is not like a lake. It is like a river, a non-stop river. Data comes in and comes by, and if we don't capture this data is gone. So all this information that is passing very quickly through us, this is something that we miss a lot of opportunities to identify patterns and how can we be more effective in delivering care, which leads to, as I mentioned, inefficiencies, people running around, putting down fires. But what is crucial, what is important that needs to be addressed at this moment? And last but not least, diagnosis. Now, healthcare is faced with so many data now, so much data now, so many variables that sometimes it takes a long time to reach a diagnosis. And of course, we and the medical professionals are doing their best. Sometimes they take longer to reach a diagnosis because it is necessary to be certain about a certain conclusion, but nevertheless, this takes some time, and in many circumstances that diagnosis is not precise. So these are some of the challenges that we have in healthcare. And the way that we have been addressing this with current AI applications. And of course, I'm looking into things that are taking place now. And tomorrow we may have even more applications. So first of all, smart devices, medical devices that when used, they give us feedback. They give us a sense if a certain location is being cut in the proper way, or if a certain temperature is as expected or not. But basically having this feedback that almost act as an assistant to doctors and nurses when they're treating patients, caring for patients. Robotic surgery as well, which also speaking about having a kind of assistant that will not only can only show surgeons what looking into the image of a patient, showing similar and comparing similar images and looking into 90% of the cases that surgeons did what was not expected. So having this kind of information to support the outcomes of robotic assistance. Also providing what is called force feedback, when in many cases of robotic assistant, the surgeon is not touching the patient. So it's very hard to feel with his or her hands if it's actually touching a bone or a muscle, or how the tactical feedback is. And using artificial intelligence, this has already been improving a lot significantly the results and outcomes of robotic surgery. Virtual care and all other types of telemedicine also bringing patients and medical professionals together closer, even though they are not in the same room. And precision medicine, also called personalized medicine, to make sure that we also don't reduce actually the waste of spending so many medications on a patient, and making sure that these actually will work. Take an example of a lung cancer. Usually, previously, we just had the lung cancer, yes or no, patient has or not that condition. Nowadays, there are 50 types of lung cancer that can be detected using artificial intelligence algorithms, and each of these 50 types of lung cancer will require a certain drug, which is going to be way more effective than having just a regular drug to treat and trying to treat a lung cancer, if you will. And then early detection and workflow, predictive diagnosis, all of these processes that can be supported by AI, providing information that will allow us to take decisions faster and more precise. And last but not least, research and development, assessing big data, big chunks of data, and making us able to reach conclusions faster in which products and how we could develop these products to address the needs of the healthcare market. But what is important is that because of the characteristic of AI that learns and self-improves the algorithms of AI, this is getting better each and every minute. The more data, the more use occurs with AI, the better and more precise it becomes. And that is something very unique, because this is different than just having an automated process or a data process. It is about self-improvement and becoming more precise and better with each minute, each day. And the coronavirus actually, as I mentioned, accelerated the need of AI. So in UK, the NHS, National Health Service, is actually applying AI to manage a backlog of patients who previously could not go into the healthcare system to have a breast screening for breast cancer. They could not go there because these were considered as elective procedures. However, if you reduce the number of screening performed, you can potentially increase substantially the number of late-stage cancers. So how could the NHS deal as efficiently as possible with this line of patients who need to be screened as soon as possible? They are applying AI. Also in Europe, we have the largest consortium ever built among academic institutions, companies, and other institutions in Europe, which is the CARE, the Corona Accelerated Research and Development in Europe, which is powered by AI to find ways to more effectively treat the coronavirus patients and detect it as well. And also including the example of a Bulgarian invention, which is also powered by AI, which is automated robot that actually detects the surrounding environment, in this case, a hospital room or hospital aisle, and it's able to very efficiently clean that environment to reduce to as minimum as possible the chances of having coronavirus in that environment. So imagine the benefit to a process flow, to safety, to security, having a machine looking into that and performing these actions in a repetitive way. And a few cases of AI applications. So for example, these are all projects that we executed by Valueconnected. And what I wanted to highlight here are the numbers, are the quantified value of AI in healthcare. So we had a client that needed our support to incorporate a wearable device that actually monitors the heart rhythm of the patient and other cardiac events. And by using them, they were able to actually improve patient outcomes by 60%. Versus using traditional devices such as a Holter, for example. And for diabetes, one of our clients also has a device that is a wearable device, continuous blood glucose monitoring, but also provides a kind of interaction with the patient, understands the answer from the patient, understands the preference for the patient for alerts, for notifications, and by creating interactive sessions is able, just by using app, and this is all AI, to reduce hypoglycemia cases by 57%. There was another case in the United States of a client that needed our help to use a rapid diagnostic to launch a rapid diagnostic to detect early kidney injury, which, if not treated in a matter of hours, can make the patient turn into a chronic patient who will require dialysis for a long time period, which is a lifetime period, which is absolutely very much expensive. So they were able to reduce actually 35% of the chronic injuries to the kidney. And last but not least, another example more recent than others is the management of hospital patient flow. To understand that the core, the understanding of prioritizing the core of each hospital unit and making sure that unit is doing their best. For example, hospital triage is to make sure the patient goes to the right specialist or to the right room as quickly as possible. That's the core function. So how can AI work with this? So the function of, for example, inventory. How can we make sure we organize that as quickly as possible? So this is more for a provider perspective, but also something that our client was able to reduce costs for the hospital by 25%. Of course, this varies across the units, but because this was a hospital-wide implementation system, this is also an average result that they were able to achieve. So these are all fantastic examples, real examples of things that we have been seeing. And as I mentioned to you, taking our personal opinion, personal perspective, from a few projects of AI in 2016, now we have dozens of projects of AI, and we expect even more. So from our perspective, this is something that is actually coming full force to the market. But what can we expect with this? What can we expect looking ahead? So wanted to address what I believe is one of the most important questions, is that is AI going to replace human beings? And the answer is, what I see is not. No, AI acts like a neural system, and like a brain and the nerves of a healthcare. But still, we need the people, and we will always need human professionals to look into those decisions and validate them and or implement them. So it's not any way to replace anybody in the healthcare system, but to make the healthcare system better by implementing AI, which look into an seamless integrations of a data, humans, and device, making sure that we are using the best data that we need for that moment, because there is a lot of data, but there is also a lot of irrelevant data, which leads us to inefficiencies, not suboptimal processes, and this integration will allow the healthcare system to hopefully be at its best. Security and privacy will become major concerns, and this is something that will definitely be needed to be part of the discussions of hospital boards, payers, health insurance boards, and other kinds of executive discussions, strategic discussions. How can we make sure we are protecting the data? Because AI, as incredible as it seems, does not need a lot of data to be efficient, but the data is, as I mentioned, like a river. It will keep coming, and more data will come later on. So how can we make sure this data is protected? And this is not going to be a technical discussion, only a technical discussion anymore. Empower and adherence, patients will have more power. As I mentioned with the case of the continuous glucose monitoring, patients are able to take decisions themselves assisted by AI. Let's remember that in the 60s, when the thermometer was launched, many doctors thought patients would not be able to use a thermometer because they would not be capable of taking their own temperature. Nowadays, patients assisted by AI, and also, of course, with a different relationship between doctors and patients, they are able to take way more decisions regarding their own health and preferences. And finally, we look forward to having a faster and more reliable healthcare system driving lower costs as well. So for AI in healthcare, this is very exciting times, could not be more exciting, and tomorrow's going to be even more, and it's going to continue like that. With that, I close my presentation. I leave my contacts over there in case somebody wants to follow up a discussion, but I will stop here. And once again, thank you very much for the invitation.
Thank you, Ernesto. That was indeed a very interesting oversight of the future of the AI and machine learning in the digital healthcare. So we'll see. It opened also place for discussion after we finish the presentations. So let me introduce our next speaker today. He's Ben Motley, owner of leads.healthcare. Ben has more than 10 years of extensive experience with pre and post-launch market access activities for medical devices. He's heavily involved in digital technology and medical applications. He has experience with the German's DIGA pathway and UK's NICE digital tech framework. He has a strong focus on quantifying and demonstrating the value of medtech. So Ben has also extensive experience in developing value stories, value dossiers, and managing health technology assessments across European countries. So Ben will share today more information on the market access for digital technologies in Germany. And so Ben, the floor is yours. I cannot hear you.
Let me see. Can you hear me? I'm
Yes.
dialed in. Okay, perfect.
Yeah, it's working.
Okay, good. Okay, let's see. Does the screen sharing function work?
Yes.
Okay.
Just a minute, I think, because it's still coming.
Okay. Doesn't work.
Then I can share the presentation. Just a second.
Oh, hold on a second. I'm switching from the PDF to the PowerPoint. Maybe that works better.
Yeah, I can see now the PowerPoint presentation. Yep.
Okay, so thank you very much for inviting me for this session. Very interesting topic, and thank you, Ernesto, for this very interesting overview focusing on AI. Like you've mentioned, I am the owner and founder of a company called leads.healthcare. We're essentially active in the European markets, well, providing strategic market access, advice to medical device companies, digital healthcare companies. We're implementing this device as well, so helping actually bring these technologies into the markets, well, in front of the decision makers and into the reimbursement systems. This topic is very interesting indeed, and I'm very happy to share with you in a very brief way. We could probably talk for hours about this topic. A new pathway that has been created in Germany. So I remember from a couple of years ago when we were involved with digital technology, specifically with apps, smartphone apps in the digital space, how to actually get funding for these types of technologies. This has been a major topic for many, many years. And even though many systems have thought about how to actually bring digital technology to the patient, to the patient's home, to the smartphones, this has remained theory and very, very cumbersome. There's only very minimal positive examples, for example, in the UK, where there had been innovative funding schemes that covered digital technology as well. And earlier this year, Germany actually introduced a structured pathway, which is called the DIGA pathway, standing for Digital Applications. And it is the first structured pathway of its kind. That's why it is indeed very, very special, because it's not only a review and assessment recommendation kind of procedure. At the end of this pathway, there's actually a funding, a mandatory funding associated to the technical or to the digital technology. And this makes digital applications prescribable by a physician in a healthcare system for the first time in any country, as far as I know. So I'm not aware of any other healthcare system that has implemented such a mandatory funding mechanism. Why is it special? There's another kind of special thing that comes with this pathway. There were a lot of stakeholders involved in actually designing this pathway. It was not just the authorities and the academia which thought about ways to assess and then bring digital technology to the patient and into the healthcare system. There were startups involved, the industry was involved, and the German policymakers, they recognized that the whole digital app and digital care setting or sector is heavily driven by a startup scene, by small and mid-sized companies that neither have the experience nor the funding to invest into large-scale clinical trials like Pharma or big medtech companies. So with this in mind, this reimbursement pathway has been designed and actually features a lot of different possibilities for smaller companies to engage with the authorities with this care pathway and to be successful, to make sure that these types of technologies actually reach the patient and are not blocked out of the system. And one of these features, that's the last point on that slide, is a so-called coverage with evidence development component within this part. This means that, for example, there is a set of certain requirements to actually be submitted into that DIGA catalog, into that reimbursement list. But smaller companies that do not fully comply with these requirements, that do not have the full set of clinical data or the final proof of, let's say, clinical benefit that is required for a final admittance into that reimbursement catalog, they may be admitted on a temporal basis. They may be allowed to actually produce additional clinical data, and they are funded during that time. So they will receive reimbursement for usage of their application, and they have time to then produce more data and to actually, in a real-world kind of setting, deliver the final proof that their technology is actually beneficial to the healthcare system and to the patients. So a little bit more, some more details regarding this pathway. The opportunities, there is a huge amount of opportunities. First of all, it is the first of its kind. It's the first structured pathway specifically for digital applications. As I've mentioned, it is designed around the startup scene, around the mid-sized company, small company kind of environment that is driving this whole care setting. The evidence requirements seem relatively low in contrast to most of the traditional reimbursement pathways, where you oftentimes are faced with the requirement to produce randomized controlled trial data, sometimes even more than one randomized controlled trial with active comparators that are standard of care, etc. This is, or it is acknowledged that this type of data is not available with none of the devices or none of the medical apps that are currently reaching the market. It's very difficult to actually produce that type of data. And on the other hand, that the risks that are associated to this type of technology might be lower than when compared to traditional healthcare services and healthcare products like pharmaceutical products, etc. And therefore, there might not be the need for this type of evidence that has been traditionally being requested for medical technologies and pharmaceuticals. Another opportunity within this pathway is that it's much more general and much broader when it comes to the benefits that might be considered. So traditionally, with medical devices and with pharmaceutical products or procedures in an inpatient setting, you would have faced a patient-relevant benefit setting where usually you would look at endpoints like morbidity, mortality, maybe quality of life, so very scientific and academic setting, which is centered around the actual patient benefit. In this medical and digital care setting, a variety of different types of benefits might be accepted. These might be structural, these might be care pathway settings, these might even be time-saving benefits on a patient end or on the physician end, improved communication. So there is a variety of different, let's say, value claims that you can put forward when thinking about digital technology and the specific German DIGA pathway. But on the other hand, there are some hurdles associated to this, and the first one that is currently very, very, very important is around the CE mark and the medical device characteristic of the digital apps. This whole care pathway was designed around a CE mark setting that would rely on the medical device regulation. Unfortunately, this regulation has been delayed due to the COVID situation and other things. So it will only come next year, and most of the, or all of the companies that are currently engaged in this process, they are certified according to the old regulations, which are slightly different. So there have been discussions around whether a certain app is a medical device. We have gone through a couple of scientific advice meetings with the German authorities. And this was always a hot topic and a very important topic to make sure that the medical device or the medical app is actually a medical device, which can be questioned, for example, if you are a CE mark class 1 product, a self-certified product where no one really looks at your data or whether this specific technology is actually a medical device. And then there is another very significant hurdle with this whole pathway, even though the general requirements are quite low. At the end of this process of getting into that reimbursement list, there is a direct negotiation with the German payers, which is not unusual in the German setting. We have a variety of different reimbursement pathways, including the AMNOG pathway for pharmaceuticals, or the medical technology aids directory, where the first step is an inclusion into a reimbursement list, so a formal go, yes, you are admitted to the catalog, but then at the end, you have a very, very tough discussion and negotiation with the payers, and this will be the same for this pathway here. Okay, the two main stakeholders in this process are, on the one hand side, the German Institute for Pharmaceuticals and Medical Devices, the BfArM. They have been commissioned by the German Ministry of Health with actually being the gatekeeper in this pathway. They have worked out most of the details. They have been very open and transparent throughout the whole process of implementing this new pathway. And they are the institution that actually reviews the technologies and gives a yes or no regarding the inclusion into the benefit catalog. And then on the other hand side, as I've just mentioned, there is the Payer Association, which is the second main stakeholder in this pathway, and they will be leading the budget and pricing negotiations at the end of the inclusion process within this pathway. Sorry. And then summarizing this pathway, as I said, we could talk about for hours about this pathway, but I'll try to keep it brief to allow some comments and some discussion. So briefly, the process is split into several phases. The first phase is the manufacturer submits for a DIGA listing with the BfArM. Then the BfArM has 3 months to actually review this application and to get back with questions to challenge the application. The application is then formally notified by the BfArM in month 3, and then a phase of more or less free pricing begins, which lasts for 12 months, where the manufacturer is free to set a price for its medical application. There might be some boundaries, so we're currently still in discussions between the associations of the, well, let's say, technical and digital manufacturers, and on the other hand side, the association of the payers, whether there could be some caps or some kind of categories and some price tags for certain categories. But in principle, during this first 12 months, the manufacturer is relatively free in their pricing. In addition, this is the period in which additional evidence could be produced in case the BfArM says this evidence that you're bringing to the table with your digital application is not enough for a final inclusion. So these 12 months are a free pricing and potential coverage with evidence development phase. And then at the end of this kind of more free period, there comes the final discussion and negotiations with the payers, with their top-level association. And then the medical application is finally included into the DIGA reimbursement list with a set price that is valid from 12 months and onwards. Just in a nutshell, there are some additional hurdles and kind of special, let's say, things to consider within that pathway, but that's the general overview. And by the way, my last slide, so thank you very much for having me here and presenting very briefly about this topic. I will be happy to answer additional questions, and everybody might feel free to reach out and discuss the setting in more detail. Very interesting. I highly encourage to consider this as a valuable, let's say, structured pathway for digital technology in Europe. Thank you.
Thank you, Ben. That's indeed really interesting opportunities that are happening in Europe. It's great that we will have an example as in Germany. And let's see during the Q&A session if we could discuss in more details, although it's a broad topic, I completely understand. So our next speaker is Clare Huntington. She is Associate Director, Regulatory Affairs for Medical Devices at PharmaLex. Clare has more than 10 years of medical device industry experience, including managing EU technical files, regulatory strategy, clinical trial submissions, and post-market surveillance, including vigilance reporting. Prior to joining PharmaLex, Clare has held positions at the Medicines and Healthcare Products Regulatory Agency, MedPass International, and Johnson & Johnson. So, Clare, I'll leave the floor to you. So she will she will give us more information about the registration of medical device software applications as medical devices. So thank you, Clare.
Thank you very much, Milena, and thank you again for the invitation to speak today. Are my slides available? I think Eudora is bringing them up, hopefully. Great, there we go. So I'm going to speak to you a bit about smartphone applications. So as Ben mentioned, actually, the classification of apps as medical devices is quite challenging. So I'm going to speak a bit about that. And then some of the regulatory considerations when trying to jump through the regulatory hoops that we have for medical devices. So next slide, please. Thank you. So as we all know, smartphones are everywhere. They are the most widely used portable devices in the world, used by approximately 3.5 billion. So, you know, coming up for 50% of the global population has a smartphone. Next slide, please. So there are lots of features within a smartphone that make it particularly useful in healthcare. So the fact that they're portable, very good connectivity, you can take photos and videos, record sounds. There are some embedded sensors sometimes, like thermometers. And they've also got high processing power. So we can download apps onto our phone, and they can harness these features and be really useful tools within a healthcare setting. Next slide, please. So when is an app a medical device? So we do have a definition of software as a medical device, which is software or an app intended to be used for a medical purpose that isn't a hardware medical device. So then we also have to consider the definition of a device, which is that the product must have therapeutic or diagnostic purpose. So some examples of apps that can be classified as devices include accessories or extensions to devices, such as direct control or remotely displaying values of a medical device. If it's providing support for an individual patient, such as drug dose calculations, and software for analysis of images that are collected in a medical setting. So the key thing to consider when looking at an app, whether it's a device or not, is that it must be performing an action on data, not only storing or communicating the data. So on the next slide, we'll talk about some examples of apps that would not be classified as devices. So if they're just providing a copy of information, or if it's an educational tool for training of a healthcare provider or a general patient population, if it's supporting general office operations in a healthcare setting, but there's no diagnostic function, or if it's a generic aid or general purpose product. So on the next slide, we talk about the classification of an app. So if you've determined that the app does meet the definition of a medical device, the next job we have to do is to identify the appropriate risk class associated with that device. The new medical device regulation, which is fully enforced next year in May, has a specific rule to cover software. This is Rule 11. And this tells us that if the software is intended to provide information that's then used for decisions with diagnosis or therapeutic purposes, it should be a 2A, unless it has an impact that could result in a death or irreversible deterioration. That would be considered a class 3, so the highest risk of medical devices that we have. If that software could potentially lead to a serious deterioration of a person's health or a surgical intervention, this would be a class 2 medical device. If it's monitoring physiological processes, it's a 2A, unless it has it's a vital physiological parameter which could result in immediate danger. That is then a class 2B, and all other software is class 1. Next slide, please. I want to just show you some examples of these, so some real-world apps, so that you can get a feel for the risk class that these products might sit in. So an example of a class 1 app is an app to support conception. So the user could enter information such as temperature, and there would be an algorithm within the app that would then identify the fertility status of the user on that current day. This would be a class 1 app per Rule 11, Part C. An example of an app that would meet the risk class 2A is one that would calculate the risk of having a heart attack within the next 10 years based on cholesterol levels. A class 2B example is if an app is analyzing a user's heartbeat to detect abnormalities, and then a physician would use that to support their diagnosis. And then the highest risk class 3 apps, it could be something like if it's predicting 3-month mortality risk in patients with chronic liver disease, and this could then be used to prioritize for donor organ allocation. And next slide, please. So there are lots of useful tools out there when trying to determine if an app does meet the classification of medical device or not. The MDCG, which is an EU group, has put out a really good guidance document, which is very detailed and has lots of information. I also really like the MHRA tool that they have to identify the software and whether it's classified as a device. But there are lots of others out there. Thank you. Next slide, please. So once you've identified that your product is a medical device, you then have to think about what you need to do to demonstrate that it is both safe and is performing within your technical file, particularly for notified body review or if it's self-certified. As part of the new medical device regulation, they've introduced general safety and performance requirements. These replace the essential requirements from the directive, but are much greater in number. There's many more requirements that you have to demonstrate compliance to. One new section is section 17, which talks about electronic programmable systems. So you need to be able to demonstrate that your product is designed to ensure repeatability, reliability, and performance, that you've considered the state of the art and you're taking into account the principles of development lifecycle, risk management, including information security, verification, and validation. And in the case of a mobile device, you need to think about the specific features of that platform, such as the size, any limitations that might introduce, or any external factors related to their use, such as which environments is it going to be used in. So these all need to be considered and addressed within the GSPR checklist. Next slide, please. We also have section 18 of the GSPR has a really relevant point, which is that you need to design and manufacture these products to protect against unauthorized access that could hamper the device from functioning as intended. So this is essentially cybersecurity, and the MDCG also have a really detailed document to support with cybersecurity for medical devices. On the next slide, I'm going to just talk a little bit about some unique elements. So, obviously the MDR has to be met as fully as possible, but having an app as a medical device brings some different challenges. So, for example, labeling. With a typical product that you hold in your hand, a medical device, it's very clear where the labeling needs to go, what needs to be included. App developers will also have to include all of this information within their app if it is a medical device. So this could be included in the screens or the interface of the app or in the general conditions, but the requirement is that this is continuously available to the users. And again, with the instructions for use, unless you meet the exemption that says you don't need one, this needs to be available to the users of the app if it is a medical device. Unique device identification is another new requirement under the MDR. Again, this needs to be within the app. You only need to include the human readable portion, so you don't need to have a barcode because that would be quite meaningless to a lot of the users. But it still needs to be included. I think we'll skip the next slide in interest of time. They've just gone into UDI in a bit more detail. Just some information. So standards, there are lots of standards out there. This is definitely not a finite list. But when you're looking at the relevant standards that you want to be adhering to, the standard quality management system requirements, risk management. When you're looking at risk management with apps, you have to consider both the safety, but also at the security of the app may have on patient safety. Usability is very important with apps to make sure that it's very clear how it should be used. Safety, obviously. And then there's two that are specific to software, specific for this application, which is health software and software lifecycle management. Next slide, please. Obviously, it goes without saying all kinds of apps are impacted by this, but we have to make sure that we're considering it with the medical devices. You have to consider the GDPR within the EU. You have to consider data encryption, pseudonymization, consent tracking, audit trail, right to be forgotten. These are all things that would need to be considered in the development, and we'd probably need to include references to that within your technical documentation. So my final slide is just a summary of what I've talked about. So when you are faced with an app, you have to go through the classification process to understand if it is a device or not. And if it is a device, which classification it sits in, which will then determine the requirements that you have in the future. Just to mention, a lot of apps will be up-classified if they are under the directive. The majority of apps are class 1. And under the regulation, the majority will be 2A or above. These then will benefit from the extension, so these won't need to be up-classified and approved under the MDR until 2023. So there's a bit of a breather there. Once you know that the app is a device, you have to consider the special requirements of having this type of product when putting together a technical documentation. Ensure you're using the appropriate standards and common specifications. The MDCG have actually put out a number of supporting documents for this area, not just the two that I've referenced, and they've also got a few in the pipeline, so pay attention to that. And then obviously ensure GDPR is being adhered to. So thank you very much for your attention and for letting me speak. And yeah, I see. Hopefully there are any questions we can answer together. Thank you.
Thank you, Claire. This was indeed a very valuable insight on the regulation in the EU. So there will be some challenges, as we spoke earlier. It's a challenging times that the medtech industry is facing, but it's at least it's new for everyone. So we all learn on the pace. So we received some questions and we briefly try to discuss them as we are running out of time. So what types of devices and software are actually covered with the pathway in Germany, which you presented, Ben?
That's actually a good question, and I'm a lot of manufacturers hope that this will cover kind of the whole spectrum of digital products, digital technology, AI, potentially even in an inpatient setting. Even though there are initiatives to strengthen all these kind of settings in Germany with digital technology, the DIGA pathway is specifically for apps that are prescribed by a physician to a patient who then uses them at their home. So let's say inpatient surgery settings are out of scope of this pathway. Other kind of data management settings are out of scope. It's really about technology that is used by the patient in his home. It is important to note that it could be combinations of software and hardware, so sensors plus an app that harvests data from the sensor and then do something meaningful with that data, present that to the patient or to the physician. They could be covered as well. In such kind of hardware, software components or combinations, it is very crucial to look at what actually is delivered by the software. Is the software and the app an integral part of the whole medical device, if you want to put it like that, or is it more like the whole medical device is essentially the hardware? Then this would not be covered by this pathway.
Okay, thank you, Ben. And another question is, what are the financial challenges for implementing artificial intelligence in healthcare? So maybe Ernesto, you can answer this.
Sure, thank you, Milena. Well, when you are implementing artificial intelligence, in many circumstances, you're making the work of a human being faster and more reliable. So in certain circumstances, and this is for now, and we started to think about this, in principle, it is harder to identify a specific payment pathway that will cover the cost of artificial intelligence. So the best approach, at least usually for now, is to make sure that it's possible to quantify the benefits of certain AI solution being applied to medical devices or to the healthcare system in general, and apply those findings to demonstrate the cost savings or improvement of efficiency, which means treating or caring for more patients through the same resources, and then using these arguments that will definitely justify the implementation of AI. As we move forward in the future, of course, Germany is on the forefront of that, and they wanted to be on the forefront in Europe, but there are other markets following as well, not only in Europe. There will be specific pathways that will, for example, pay for a certain application of AI. But for now, I would not consider the biggest challenge, but it's definitely a challenge that cannot be ignored. And in the sense of, okay, if I do have an AI solution, who's going to pay for that and how it's going to be funded?
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Ernesto, for your response. And maybe one last question is regarding the artificial intelligence. Does the new medical device regulation address artificial intelligence? Maybe Claire, you can.
Yes, I wasn't sure who that was.
Yeah.
I think there's not a great deal of detail specifically on the artificial intelligence, but the regulation allows for a lot of supporting documents to be created. And I know that the purpose of that was to enable the Commission and Europe to keep on top of developments in technology. So I think that we will, as the MDR becomes more mature and they are bringing in supporting documents, I'm sure we'll see more about it, but it's not talked about in great detail at the moment.
We expect, I guess we expect more guidance on this. So we'll see. As we're running out of time, it was extremely interesting, and everyone's point of views, I think, added to the panel a great amount of valuable information. Thank you for your time. And as this is the last panel for today, I would like to use the opportunity to close the session and to thank all the speakers, sponsors, and attendees for being part of the first day of Biotech Atelier 2020, the European Biotechnology Conference, which brings together scientists, business leaders, international experts to connect, exchange, and generate new ideas for innovation, entrepreneurship, and business development in the field of biotechnology, healthcare, life sciences, pharma, and information and computer technologies. So save the date. Biotech Atelier will continue tomorrow, and it's actually growing. Next year, it will be held for 3 days from 29th of September till 1st of October 2021, and we hope to meet you tomorrow and next year also. So this is the end for today, but the beginning of new partnerships, ideas, cooperation in the field of innovations and biotechnologies, and we hope you've gained knowledge and inspiration. And if anyone has missed anything of the materials will be shared shortly with the speakers and the attendees soon. So thank you all, and it's getting dark in Bulgaria. So from my side, have a nice evening, and have a nice rest of the day for some of you.
Thank you all. Have a nice evening. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you very much.
Speak to you soon.
Bye-bye.
Bye.